Welcome to Against the Tide, the podcast where extraordinary social changemakers share their stories and wisdom. More than a podcast, Against the Tide is a celebration of courageous women who defy expectation to create lasting impact by daring to forge their own paths. We'll dive deep into powerful themes such as embracing discomfort for transformative change, how your past needn't determine your future, and how breaking free from societal labels unlocks your true potential. Join me, Jo Metcalf, to hear stories of incredible women who, by swimming against the tide, prove that extraordinary things can happen. Ready to be inspired? I'm excited to introduce two ambitious intellectuals whose driven and evidence-led approach is pushing boundaries in the world of elite sport. Dr. Jenn Gandhi is a chartered psychologist specialising in the intricate connection between mind, body and emotion to optimise health and performance. With years of experience in elite sport, Jenn has worked with various national teams, supporting a culture where both staff and athletes can excel, while also providing mental health care across the system. She is now the lead for mental health and wellbeing at the FA. Joining her is Dr. Jennifer Lace, also a chartered psychologist with a focus on performance psychology. Jenn has over a decade of experience working in various roles within domestic and international football. Most recently, she has been leading on psychology for the League Managers Association. Together, they are change makers, inspiring and influencing the future of mental health and performance wellbeing in sport. Join us as we delve into their journeys, uncovering the surprising drivers behind their careers and discussing the challenges and opportunities of navigating a male-dominated environment. Please be aware that this episode touches on eating disorders and may be triggering for some listeners. Okay, welcome the mighty Jens. I can't tell you how excited I've been for this conversation and the impact that you've had personally on me and professionally in the work that I've been doing in your space of sport. And I don't think you realise how brilliant you both are. So I really can't wait for others to hear some of the stories and your backgrounds. So Jenn Lace, so this is going to get confusing with the Jens, but Jenn Lace, you're moving onto more of a freelance career within the sports space. Can you just tell us a little bit about your journey of how you've got to this place?
Yeah, firstly, thanks for having us on, Jo. And it's going to be great to be alongside Jen too, so I'm looking forward to it myself as well. I think, so I've predominantly worked in professional football as my major sports or major environment since probably the journey started, maybe 16 years old. Maybe not with an intent just to major in football, but definitely to be a sports psychologist and work with people within a sport environment. I was really young. I had a really bad eating disorder, and I was on like a talent pathway with GB trampolining at the time, or trampoline. It was GB gymnastics. Um, and I was just super ill. I was kind of that child that had everything, had great family, great friends. I was a straight A student at school. However, now as an adult, we learn that's also a concoction for high perfectionism, burnout, and an eating disorder. And it was really interesting because I learned literally 16 years old, why is this happening to me? Why am I so ill? It's something that almost snuck up on me. And I just learned really young that how powerful probably our minds was and how powerful psychology influences us and could make us really ill. So then I decided I love sport. I was semi-academic, which is interesting. I've just finished a doctorate, but it was definitely something that if I could combine psychology as an interest with my passion of different sports together, then that could suit me. So where I probably first linked into sport was I was really lucky that the school and college that I attended, or the sixth form, was a sports college, a specialist one in the area. And the Everton football team used to come to our school and they'd do their education before the system was how it is now, where clubs have their own education teams. And I was fortunate enough to ask their player welfare one day, do you have somebody in this role and can I speak to them? And she kind of sat with me and explained choosing the right degrees, the right training. And I did that, went to uni, and it's really fascinating because I remember being in my second year at uni studying sports psychology, thinking, this is really theoretical. Like, how is this going to help me work with an athlete or a coach or in the world? I'm going to quit and I want to get out and be in the sports environment. So again, I kind of connected with some people to say, can I come and look at how it works? So some really, and I will touch on it later, but influential people. And then I ended up in the world of football quite early on. And I remember at uni, they showed us the training pathway to be a psychologist. And it was, in my opinion, well, it still is, but in my opinion of kind of 19, 20-year-old me, I thought, oh, that's long. I don't think I could ever get through that. I don't think I'll have the commitment. I don't think I'll have the knowledge or the intelligence to do it. I'm kind of just finishing off this year thinking, oh, we've done it, we're there.
Fantastic. We'll pick up on some of those points, but thank you for sharing that. Really interesting. Jenn Gandhi, your job title hints at the extent of your role. Tell us what it really entails.
So yeah, my role is relatively broad. It's ever evolving. It feels like growing arms and legs, all of the time. And in some ways that's super exciting. In some ways it's also quite challenging and overwhelming, in terms of navigating that space. But in broadly speaking, so I'm responsible for the development and delivery of the FA's mental health and wellbeing strategy. So that sits across the FA's employee workforce. It sits across grassroots football, county FA, our role as a governing body nationally and more broadly, as well as all of our partners and the community work and things that we do.
But how did you get into that?
In a very wiggly way, I think. Little bit, I guess similar to Jen, I never set out to work in sport, necessarily, I don't think. And I certainly didn't set out with this plan. I think, to Jen's point, if somebody had have told me when I was picking college subjects or university subjects what the pathway to training to be a psychologist looked like, I'd have probably said, no way, I'm not good enough to do that. There's no way I can do that. That's like the next 15 years of my life. That's huge. So I sort of went into it pretty blind, I think, and just took one step and one course at a time. I always loved sport growing up. I did competitive synchronized swimming for about 12 years. I loved watching rugby with my dad. I think I was the son that my dad never had. So I grew up watching sport, playing sports. Just wanted to be outside, with a tennis ball or a bike or something. I had to be doing sport all of the time. And I also became really fascinated with the brain and psychology and mental health. And I watched a film, Silence of the Lambs, way too young. Deaf on my day, but too young to have watched that. But there's a scene in that, and I think the opening scene of that, or definitely really near to the start, and there's a psychiatrist filmed just running through the woods before she starts work. She's out for a morning run, running through the woods. Then she goes for a swim, and then she sort of gets showered, gets ready, and settles down into her office in this high security prison. And she's a psychiatrist and clinical support psychologist in the high security prison for serial killers and Hannibal Lecter, as it turns out, because of the film. And I remember watching that scene and saying to my dad, that is what I want to do. I am going to be a psychologist. That's who I want to be. I want to be that person who gets up in the morning, goes for a run through the woods, listening to a podcast or something, and dives into a swimming pool, gets showered, changed, has my own office, and is a psychiatrist. Needless to say, that's not quite exactly what I'm doing. But through the absolute love of sport, mixed with a blend of college didn't do clinical psychology, straight psychology, medicine, that kind of thing, led me down the route of sport performance, sport and exercise science with psychology. And then gradually, as I entered uni, went into transfer courses and did psychology, because I always, as much as I loved sport and was discovering the world of performance sport,
it offered me an option and an opportunity, or a way in to do the thing which I absolutely loved, which was to learn about, talk about, practice about the brain and mental health and psychology all day, every day. I couldn't get enough of it. And it also made me really fascinated with my own behaviors, my own management of emotion. I watched my sister grow up with a really serious eating disorder. I saw how that played out in my family, and I saw the impact that that had on me, as a natural perfectionist, control freak, hard worker. One of the easiest things in the world to control is food. How do you navigate that? It's through the brain, it's through the emotional system. So it all kind of played a part in that, I think. And having a family who told me I could do anything that I wanted to do, and if that's what I loved, that's what I was interested in, that's what I needed to go for. And so along the way, I remember phoning my dad up, sort of getting towards the end of my bachelor's degree, saying that I wanted to do a master's, getting towards the end of that master's and saying, actually, I want to do another master's because this is the direction I want to take. And getting halfway through that and saying, Dad, I've applied for a PhD. And this sort of went on and on and on for about 12 years. I don't think he ever thought I was going to get a job. But the nature of my PhD, I was really lucky because it was with the English Institute of Sport and Sheffield Hallam. So I didn't have to sit in an ivory tower churning out research papers. I got to work in applied sports. So the majority of my week I was working with Olympic sports, or GB hockey and swimming and table tennis, for the best part of 7 or 8 years. Did a little bit of corporate work alongside that, but got to do a clinical-based study in the impact of trauma on the brain and impact of trauma on high performance in a sport and environment, whilst working in applied sport as well, which was kind of the best of both worlds for me. Never ever thought I'd set foot in football. So I remember all through that training saying the one sport I will never work in is football. I didn't walk the walk. I didn't talk the talk. I'm the world's biggest introvert. I was a synchronized swimmer who watched rugby. And here I am. But yeah, it was one of the best things that happened, I think, entering the world of football.
Fantastic. I didn't know half of that. And Clarice is your new nickname. That's brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. Jen Late, you talked about that you didn't feel good enough to go to university and the academic pathway wasn't necessarily for you. And you thought you weren't clever enough to do where you've ended up, and you're now a doctor. I should have introduced you both as doctors. Jen Late, you weren't set on an academic pathway. What kept you in academia for so long?
I just always felt like I seen people who were on education courses that, in my experience, I just felt like they had it all. They could do the education, they could just get through, they came up with distinctions, and I just wasn't like that. I really struggled. But then a little part of me was never going to allow myself to fail. Or I remember, so this will make you laugh, but I got asked to leave A-level psychology, which the irony now, kind of 15 years later, but we had a really disruptive class for A-levels, and the class was just chatty, and the class was just super kind of, they're not naughty, but just really chatty and bubbly and lively, which is just absolutely the best place for me to be. I love that type of stuff. And I was always just asking people, how are you? What are you doing? Like, probably one of the biggest talkers in the class. And if there was something fun going on, I always wanted to be by the fun. And however, I would go home and do the study.
Both of you have talked a little bit about the adversity you faced, particularly in your early years. Do you think that's affected your career pathways in any way? Jenn Gandhi, I'll come to you first on that one.
I think mine has, for sure. So when I was about 17, probably the biggest, I guess, in terms of adversity and where I am right now. When I was 17, I got into a really difficult, awful relationship. And it was my first proper relationship. it was incredibly controlling and physically and emotionally abusive. And it went on until I was 21. So I'd started university. I had taken a gap year, but I'd been at uni for 1 year before I actually managed to leave that situation and can get myself out of that situation. But what followed that was a period of the best part of 10 years where I was partly driven by fear, I guess, of ever getting into a situation like that again. So completely and utterly avoided relationships with men of any kind, like completely avoided getting into a romantic relationship whatsoever, and just went full steam ahead into my career. And I threw absolutely everything. I felt like every ounce of control that I'd had in my life up until I was 17 got completely and utterly taken away. And after that time, I think I threw all of that into my career and learning and development. And that was all I did. And it was all I was interested in doing or talking about. And it was just kind of me and my career throughout that and the things that I could control. Yes, the food and disordered eating came up quite a lot in that because it was something that I could control post that, which also got me into the world of therapy and therapy for myself. And I think sort of those two things, would I have followed the path that I have done in getting all of the degrees and masters and conversion courses and PhDs and chartered status and things if I had somebody else in my life to think about? Possibly not. Would I have invested that much time and energy and effort that I needed in order to achieve that at the level that I wanted to achieve that and follow all of the dreams and the travel opportunities and things that came up when I only had myself to think about? Possibly not. And I think also engaging in so much therapy throughout that time as well has also benefited my approach to what I do massively in terms of the approach to my work strategically as well as the way in which I support others. So yeah, I think definitely without a doubt it has.
I didn't know that, Jen. Thank you for sharing. Jen Lace, do you want to add anything into that as well?
Yeah, again, I think quite a lot of similarities. One thing that really resonates with me is I always have a thought that, and it probably also underpins a little bit why we kind of gritted through, get your doctor title, get your chartered status, because I would always say that's something that I've done for me and nobody can take that away from me. And probably fueled by some of the things that Jen was saying in them early years, nothing as maybe traumatic as what you experienced, Jen, but the kind of early 20s me, just I remember thinking like I didn't want to stay in on a Saturday night, but I was super lucky to be offered an opportunity at the time at a championship club where I used to go in on a Sunday morning, and it was nearly 2 hours drive from my house. So I couldn't go out with my friends until, Liverpool loves a party, right? So they would maybe go out at 11 p.m. and I would be like, I can't, because I knew that I had to be up so early for Sunday to drive to my placement. And did I really want to work in football long term at that time? Probably not. But I was just, again, really lucky, or I knew the person, I'd reached out to the person previously. So it wasn't total luck. I'd done a little bit of light work to build the connection that had then facilitated me into that placement. But again, I remember thinking, but this is my bit. This is for me and this is my career. And if I focus on this now, nobody can take that away from me. I come from a family where I got two mega successful parents, and I think the perception and stereotypes sometimes of females, and especially when, I'm from a lovely area in Liverpool and people would say, oh, it's the posh area. And technically, for anyone who's listening or knows, it's a Southport postcode. So it's actually PR. So make what you want of that. But people would say, you're not from proper Liverpool. And I was just really conscious that I wanted something from me. And I needed to do this for me so that nobody could say you were giving it. Nobody could say, you know, I was really conscious. I don't know if I should even say this out loud, but I was really conscious of being a female, obviously white blonde hair. And I wanted something that I felt like at the time gave me something I'd achieved.
Right, again, really powerful story. Not everybody's got a role model that they can call to mind, but I understand both of you have role models that have influenced you. Can you tell us a bit about them? So, Jenn Gandhi, I'll come to you first.
Absolute number one is my granny Pat. And I will do my best not to get emotional, but she fills up so much of my heart. There's not a single day that goes by that I don't think of my granny Pat. She was my dad's mum, and she served in the war. She married to my granddad, who was your really stereotypical kind of hard-faced war sergeant. I'm not sure exactly what role he played in the army. And my granny Pat was this tiny, tiny little petite woman, but oh my God, she was the most powerful, resilient, strong, and loving and caring and compassionate woman I have ever had the privilege to just have as such a massive part of my life. And she spent the last years of her life, must have been about 6 or 7 years of her life, pretty much in bed. And throughout that time, the majority of that time was when I was still in training and I was finishing my PhD. I was living in Sheffield and she was down in Somerset and Taunton. And I'd go down and see her at every single opportunity I possibly could. And she'd, without fail, even through the years of being completely bedridden and reliant on full support, she would always tell me, at least the sun had come up this morning and the birds are in the sky, and just chatting about the newsreel that was going on and asking me if I'd got married yet and when I was going to bring a husband back to meet her. And nothing in life ever took the smile off her face or phased her in any way. She was, I think it's that blend of being so strong and resilient in the face of everything throughout her life, yet also unassuming and compassionate and loving. So yeah, Granny Pat, absolutely number one role model.
Brilliant. Yeah, you're making me cry now. Jen Lace, who's your role model?
I've more had people who professionally have been like flashpoints for me, who I've been really inspired by. So it's very similar to your story earlier, Jen, about meeting the psychiatrist. At early 20s, I was on placement in an eating disorder clinic. I actually wasn't in the eating disorder clinic for once, which was fascinating. But actually, I must have been middle 20s, actually a little bit later on. And there was a psychiatrist who led the MDT team called Dr. Jessica. And she was a little bit late to the meeting. And it was one of my first placements outside male professional football. And it was such a lovely placement because you go in and male professional football has changed significantly. So this was like 2010, 11. 2011, 12, sorry. And they asked each other how they were. They said good morning. They spoke about non-football things. They were talking about what they had for dinner the night before, and they brought Tupperware dishes in. It was just very different than a very football-focused environment that I'd been quite privy to. And I was like, this is quite nice. And then Dr. Jessica was late. And she was leading the MDT meeting, and the way she arrived and just how she conducted herself, and she was just super warm and lovely, but also really knew her knowledge. And then as we worked through all of the different cases, something that I probably also do is she almost took like a helicopter approach to the conversation. So she'd listen to everybody's, the dietitian, there was a weight management person there was a clinical psychologist there. She'd listen to all of their opinions and all of what they were doing for somebody, but then she would say, but actually this is this person's journey. this person's been bounced between services, or this person is, let's look at it here, they've been like this last year and here's where they are. So she really kind of took, and whether she's done it deliberately or not, but it was really present throughout a lot of the meetings and cases. She brought it all together and was really maybe critical rather than just offering it, a part of the puzzle. And I remember leaving thinking, I'm going to be like Dr. Jessica. She knew her knowledge. She was great with her people. She conducted her meetings well, and she just led really well, in my opinion. So definitely, in a real kind of practitioner, technical inspiration was, and even now, kind of Dr. Jessica probably doesn't know the impact that she had on me then. And then somebody else who was really influential to me, and again, she probably does, I probably need to tell her, is a lady called Nicole Zug. So I met Nicole when I was maybe late 20s, and so she used to work for Kellogg's, this like the food company, manufacturing company. And she was, at the time, I think her job was something along the lines of lead for talent management for Kellogg's. And she was blonde hair. She was a bubbly person. She delivered a speech at it was like a round table that I attended. And I just remember thinking, again, she's brilliant. She's personable. She's herself. She's not maybe, scared to just be. Her hair was lovely. She was super bubbly. She was just herself, but she knew her knowledge, and she was in this leading space. And UK Kellogg's had headhunted her from America. Now she's gone on and she's back in America. I think she's senior vice president at another food distribution company. But again, a real personable person that knew their stuff as well. And I think for me, them people who I come across who are great as humans and will be the first people to say, how's your day? Or I don't know how that works, or how is that? But then when they really need to talk about their area, are informed, know their knowledge. I think for me, them people are my real role models to be like, definitely.
So human and the sort of authenticity, and that's fantastic. That leads us really nicely into talking about swimming against the tide. Having worked in sport, I know that it's a male-dominated environment. Has that affected you? Jenn Gandhi, I'll come to you first.
Yes. I think, to be honest, I'd link that as well back to the role model thing. So I know I talked about my personal role model. My professional role model would absolutely be Dr. Pippa Grange. And I had the privilege of working under her from, I think it was January 2019 till the start of 2020 when she came into the FA. And now she is certainly one of my closest friends, mentors. The impact that she had on my life, that will certainly never be taken away, because she changed the way I was able to feel in the role and the journey and the career that I'd chosen. I think up until that point of working with her, I always felt like in some ways I was a bit of a triangle trying to shove myself into a square, and it just wasn't quite working. It wasn't comfy. I wasn't able to be authentic, but also practice performance psychology in line with my own values and my own philosophy and my own beliefs around how I wanted to do that and what I believed to be true about that. And then met Pippa, and she completely flipped the approach on its head, and everything suddenly became not about the stuff that you learn from a textbook in training and the stuff that you have to write about in exams and assessments and all of the rest of it, and the models that different organizations sell as products, and you have to kind of go and deliver somebody else's model and belief and framework. She completely flipped it on its head, and the whole approach and philosophy behind what we were setting out to do as a team in the organization. And this was when I was part of the performance psychology team, so before this role. was about culture and environment and humans. And I think she sort of led by #human first became a thing across the whole thing, and the entire strategy changed. It was all about culture, it was all about environment, and it was all about people and humans. And that was totally different to anything that I'd kind of been a part of before, which had to involve certain models or had to involve certain practices and certain mindsets and certain approaches and things. And I just had this feeling that it just didn't quite fit. I didn't quite belong in that environment at all. So I really found that I could grow under her leadership, as well as absolutely admiring the strength that she had as the only woman to work within the team that she was working in. And it wasn't her first rodeo by any stretch. She'd worked with Australian swimming and the NFL. But to stand up as the only female leader and navigate the direction that she wanted to take our practice and our team, which she knew was very, very different. It was a huge change. It was a huge shift in thinking and in mindset and in approach. And she went for it and she did it. And it had a massive, massive impact. But it was so completely different. And anyone who works in football, Jen, you'll know this. Change is not something that you do. And it's definitely not something that you do without a little bit of guts backing you up behind it to kind of step into that space. And I just really admired that because she, at no point did she sway from her own value set and her own belief set. And at no point, despite the scope and breadth and intensity of her role at that level, she never didn't have time for anybody and didn't have time to understand us. And the amount of time she spent sitting down with me to understand me and my value set and my purpose and belief set around the way that I wanted to practice, and then fully get behind and support me on being able to do that. I had never, up until that point, experienced leadership support, anything like that. And I remember thinking and experiencing through that time that when the time comes that I'm able to take on a role like that and I'm able to lead and support other people, I really want to be able to do it that way.
Fantastic. There's lots of sort of that human side coming out.
And one thing I will say, I know my role models were both female. I've worked with some amazing male leaders. So I always say, I know some of my counterparts on their journeys maybe haven't, but I really need to credit especially two that I'm thinking of, two real male leaders that helped me through our 20s, helped me connect, helped show me how to lead. Never really seen maybe you're young and you're a female as a negative when maybe the rest of the environment did. When people say, if for example in a role, how is that going to be if that's a challenge? And then I say them three things. Look, these are the challenges that we've kind of balanced for the last 15 years of our professional careers. So we're pretty used to, Jen will probably also agree, pretty used to having to be the different ones or having to have the challenging conversations or being brave in them moments, being ourselves. And coping with that both personally and professionally.
That definitely resonates. I'm sure it does with Jenn Gandhi. Let's move to yourself, Jen. But let's think about, despite those frustrations, you've both done incredibly well and are very successful and committed to your careers. Tell me how you've remained resilient and achieved so much, building on what Jen Lace has said, Jenn Gandhi.
I think over time, and don't get me wrong, because there are times now where it is still really hard. And I feel like the world's biggest imposter, if anybody was to put the word leader towards my name, I was probably throw it a mile away and think that like I don't have that qualification. No one's taught me how to do that. That's not me. I'm just sat back. I'm just Jenn Gandhi. I'm just doing what I think is the right thing to do, and I'm doing my best every single day. I think in like with some of the stuff that Jen's talking about, you learn over time, the more you can build and establish and be comfortable with your own identity and in your own skin, the more lighthearted you can be about some of that other stuff. And so like take the all male environments. When you're traveling and on the road in an all male environment, all the players are male, the entire staff and support team are male, even the bus driver's male. And you're on the road for 2 to 3 weeks. At some point in time, you've got to do your washing, right? And the standard thing is stick your washing in a bag, take it to the kit room, kit man will take it down, do all the washing, bring it back. People don't know what to do with women's washing. And it's like, is there a separate room for this? Is there a separate process? Do you think you could take it to hotel reception? Like, not sure what to do with this. For me, it's just my washing. Like, it's zipped up in a bag. Just take it down. I'm totally not bothered with that process. But I think you spend an awful lot of time navigating, anticipating, and then managing other people's emotions as opposed to your own. If that makes sense. And I think for certainly the first 3/4 of my career, I took an awful lot quite personally. I found it very difficult. It felt like I was getting a little bit bruised and dented every day and doubted myself in this career and doubted the journey and the path that I was going to be able to take. Because if you don't, I think forming your own identity around that is definitely the biggest thing. Because you do spend so much time managing and navigating other people's emotions, and kind of trying to hold that space and support them through, well, how is this going to work? And I think second to that, believing and understanding what you do, because there is probably never a day where in some way, shape or form through conversation, you're going to have to try and sell that to somebody. And ask somebody else to trust and believe in what you're saying. And that's really difficult if you don't truly believe in it yourself.
So what do you think needs to change to enable women to thrive more in these types of male-dominated environments?
I think I mean, the easiest thing to say is more women in leadership positions, but I do and don't believe in that. I do believe in it, but I actually think it's more of the people that Jenn is talking about, the 2 male leader role models, who really bought in and got the value that women can bring to this space. I don't know. I really struggle with that answer.
So male allies, is that sort of having males that are sort of championing women as well as women championing others?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a combination of lots of things, but certainly male, well respected, strong male allies. I think is a huge thing.
Great. Have you got any words of wisdom to tell anyone that's wanting to step into your shoes and just starting out their career in sports and sports psychology specifically?
Honest, I don't really know if this is personal or professional words of wisdom. I'm not sure I'd have the confidence to say it's words of wisdom. But for what it's worth, my 2 cents is take your time. Take your time and also pay attention and spend time on yourself as well. don't be afraid to spend time discovering your identity. This world and roles like mine, roles like Jen's, it's not a one size fits all. There are so many different ways of doing what we do. And I honestly believe the way to do it really well is to be able to bring yourself into that. And that requires doing your own work as well, and spending time on yourself, shaping your own identity, understanding your own value system, your own philosophical approach, what you believe to be true about people, about the world, about the environment, and the impact that you really want and believe that you can make, because there's no script to follow in this space and there's no right way of doing it. But you really have to, I believe, happy to be challenged, but you have to be able to bring yourself to that, and be a bit vulnerable and a bit real, because otherwise people will catch you out, and people will catch you out, and people won't believe in you if you don't believe in yourself.
Fantastic. Jenn Lace, any words of wisdom from yourself of any woman going into a male-dominated work environment that you'd like to share as well?
Yeah, and I think it links to what you've just said, Jen. I think you give the how to do what I'm about to say. So I would probably say don't lose yourself. So again, I've worked in environments where I've worked so hard to fit in or so hard to try and deliver outcomes in a compromised way that has really affected me as a person, and I really struggled with that. It was a big lesson that I learned and had to almost overcome as well after. But what I learned is that I'd lived in line with my own values as much as I possibly could, and at the point of which it was compromised, that was almost like the eject button. So definitely be yourself, don't be afraid to be yourself, but also don't lose yourself. And I think that's why it links with what you said, Jen, because your point is very about knowing who you are, knowing what you do value. And then I think it's easier to navigate when the challenges happen, because you can see where the differences is, or like maybe where the rub is a little bit, why something's not working. So definitely don't lose yourself. And I think the second one is be curious. So I think sometimes as a female in a male environment, we may feel like we need to bring something to the table. So we need to offer a direct opinion or a solution, or we need to prove ourselves. And we don't. Asking questions because we're not sure, showing that vulnerability is probably one of our biggest skill sets, and massively stereotypical. But in my experience of working with females, we are very different than males. And in male-dominated environments, in high power, high challenge organizations, vulnerability goes a long way. So if you're naturally an open person, or can be an open person, and are okay with showing vulnerability, being curious to ask, how does that work? Or why do we do this? Or what is it that I can help with in this space? Or how can I add value to what you're trying to build? As opposed to arriving at the table with trying to feel like you need the answers, or trying to feel like you need to prove yourself. I think sometimes it's almost like fire and fire don't work. Whereas again, goes back to who you are, not losing yourself, and then the ability to be curious in them spaces. Certainly.
Thanks for sharing your vulnerability today and always. Working with you guys in the sporting environment definitely has enabled me to be myself, coming into an environment that is feeling, it can be quite daunting, and meeting people like you is truly inspirational. So thank you very much. Thanks for listening to Against the Tide, brought to you by Think for Wellbeing, the strategic consultancy for social change makers, with thanks to Louise Kavanagh at Purposeful Marketing and the team at Sticks and Glass. Subscribe to Against the Tide wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an inspiring episode.